Scripture reading today taken from John 2, 19 to 21. Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Then the Jews said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. This is the word of God. Amen.
We've been studying in the book of Ezekiel, and last time I shared with you basically a summary of all the sign acts, also known as prophetic acts of Ezekiel, that God told Ezekiel to do. And today we're going to do something different from the regular flow of the study. I'm going to take from there. Did you receive all the handouts? Yes? Yes. If you did not, please raise your hand. Yes. If we do not have enough, we can we can make copies. We can kind of make copies. Yes. Raise your hand high if you still have not received it. I think we're going to need to make a few more copies. Please only take one per person. Yeah. If you need one for your brother and sister and your dad, mom, grandpa, your pet, we'll make an extra copy for you afterwards. Okay, everybody has it. And so please do not fix your eyes upon these while I'm talking about something else. Only when I point you to where you need to look at. Very good. Your eyes are on me. Okay, I'm gonna direct your eyes to something else to recap what we have been studying. I didn't know we were going to have so many people who have not been studying Ezekiel with us, but it is by God's grace that we are doing a recap. We will do a 5-minute recap of all the Ezekiel sign acts and the summary of what we've been studying, except the Ezekiel's temple. That was a separate study. So I'm going to continue after the recap on the screen. Is it too cold, everyone? No, it's okay. It's okay. Okay. Please make sure that the volume is high enough. Let's watch.
The book of the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a priest who had been living in Jerusalem during the first Babylonian attack on the city. And they spared the city, but they took a first wave of Israelite prisoners and hauled them off into exile, and Ezekiel was among them. So the book begins 5 years after all of that, and Ezekiel is sitting on the bank of an irrigation canal near his Israelite refugee camp, and it's his 30th birthday, no less, the year that he would have been installed as a priest in Jerusalem. And then all of a sudden, Ezekiel has this vision. He sees a storm cloud approaching. And then inside the cloud are 4 strange creatures that have wings outstretched and touching each other. And these creatures each had 4 faces. And then he saw 4 wheels, one by each creature. And then he saw that the wings of the creatures were supporting this dazzling platform. And then on that platform is a throne. And then sitting on that throne is this human-like creature, glowing and shrouded in fire. And then all of a sudden Ezekiel realizes what he's seeing. He calls it the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. It's God riding his royal throne chariot. Now the word glory, in Hebrew it's kavod. It means heavy or significant. The biblical authors use this word to describe the physical appearance and manifestation of God's significance when he shows up in person. These images in the vision, they're very similar to what happened when God appeared on Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus. And it's also very similar to the depictions of God's presence over the Ark of the Covenant. And that's actually the most shocking thing about Ezekiel's vision. What is God's glory doing in Babylon? It's supposed to be above the Ark of the Covenant, in the temple in Jerusalem. And so the first section of the book opens to explore that question as Ezekiel begins to accuse Israel of rebellion. So God first speaks to Ezekiel from the throne chariot, and he commissions him as a prophet. Ezekiel is to accuse Israel of breaking their covenant agreement with God in a couple ways. Israel has given their allegiance to other gods and has been worshiping idols, and this has all led to rampant social injustice and violence. And so as a result, God appoints Ezekiel to warn the people. The first Babylonian attack that took Ezekiel into exile is going to be matched by another, and Jerusalem, its temple, all face imminent destruction. So Ezekiel uses words and more to get his message across. He also performs sign acts. And these were a form of street theater. Ezekiel would go out in public and start behaving in these really bizarre ways that were like parables of his prophetic message. So he was supposed to build a tiny model of Jerusalem and then stage an attack on it. Or he was to shave off all of his hair and then chop it up with a sword. Or the most extreme, he was to play the role of the scapegoat on the Day of Atonement. And he would lay on his side for over a year, eating food cooked over poop, as a sign of the nasty food that people will have to eat during the siege of Jerusalem. And perhaps the most disheartening thing of all is the bad news God gave Ezekiel that no one was going to listen to him. Israel would reject him because of their rebellious and hard heart. And this recalls Moses' description of the people after the wilderness rebellion, when he predicted that exile would one day happen. And Ezekiel had the unfortunate privilege of seeing it all come to pass. And so a dismayed Ezekiel, he begins to perform his task. And after about a year, he has another vision. This one is about the temple. He goes on this virtual tour of the temple, and he sees what's happening there in his absence, and it is not good. In the outer courtyard, in front of the temple, he sees this large idol statue. And then he sees the elders of Israel worshiping other gods, both outside and inside the temple. And then he sees the women of Israel. They're worshiping a Babylonian god named Tammuz. And the vision ends with God's glorious throne chariot moving up and away from the temple. It's leaving, going east, headed towards Babylon. And so in chapter 11, we come to see why and how God's glory appeared to Ezekiel there in Babylon. Israel's idolatry and their covenant violations, it's become so blatant and offensive that God has left his temple. They've driven him away, and he consigns it to destruction. But God hasn't abandoned his people. Rather, he goes into exile with them. And so at the end of this vision in chapter 11, God promises that he will return a remnant of Israel back to the land, and he'll transform them by removing their heart of stone and giving them a new, soft heart of flesh, so that they can love and truly follow their God after all. This is a small glimmer of hope, and it's quickly submerged under the reality of the imminent destruction. But chapter 11 is a key.
We'll stop there. Did you enjoy it? Pretty good. I think it's good, especially because we have so many young people here. Can we have the lights? Thank you. If I were to do that, it would take me about 2 hours. But thanks to Mr. YouTube, we were able to get a nice recap. So you basically understand, right? Now, that's what basically we've been studying over the last few weeks. Today we're going to compare Ezekiel's signettes and Jesus' signs in the book of John, in the Gospel of John. So the signs in the Gospel of John and Ezekiel compared. Today we read John chapter 2 verses 19 through 21. Jesus compares himself, and Jesus says, destroy this temple, for I will raise it up again. That is basically the gist of Ezekiel's message. In Ezekiel, because of the disobedience of the people, because they served idols and did not worship God, God said, I will destroy this temple. And all these sign acts were about the destruction, coming destruction. And then, towards the end, God shows Ezekiel not this image of people worshiping idols, but God shows Ezekiel the heavenly temple that is to come down. And so basically the message is, because of your disobedience, the temple will be destroyed. But I will rebuild it again. But that temple rebuilt is not by human hands, but it is the heavenly one. John chapter 2, verse 19 through 21, Jesus says, destroy this temple that was built by Herod's hands. Right? And then, because this Jesus said right after he visited the temple, and what we call cleansing of the temple, because people were exchanging money, not worshiping God properly, Jesus basically made a mess out of it. He went irate and turning over tables, and he just cast the people out. And then coming out, he said, destroy that temple, for I will rebuild it again, in 3 days. And then people said, hey, this temple was built for 46 years. How can he build it again in 3 days? And then Jesus said, he's referring to his own body. And so this message is pretty much similar from Ezekiel. And another thing is Ezekiel's background is when the Israelites were taken into Babylon as in exile, as captives. And their hope and prayer is that they can come back to Jerusalem. And God's promise is that although the glory of God had departed from the temple, when you return, the glory of God will return in that temple, right? Now, in Revelation, there's two cities compared. Israel, the people of God, will be destroyed because they will fall into the temptation of the great harlot, and the city in which the great harlot and the fallen people are is, what's the name of the city? The Great Babylon, right? And in the end, the new city called the New Jerusalem will come down, and there will stand the temple of God. True or false?
True.
False! In the New Jerusalem, there is no temple. New Jerusalem is the temple. But it says the temple, true temple, is the Lamb. Right? Jesus is the temple. So, who wrote this revelation? John, again. Right? And Ezekiel is the Old Testament revelation, basically. Right? Speaking of the same message. And so, I borrow some ideas and some quotes from a theologian named Brian Peterson. Combination with senior pastor's teachings. And his book is called John's Use of Ezekiel. Brian Peterson. And I'll read from what you have, so you can now look at the paper. Ezekiel is the book that depicts the heavenly temple as the ultimate hope in the end of judgment and destruction that takes place on earth. John wrote about New Jerusalem as a final hope in the end of judgment and destruction that takes place on earth. So basically, Ezekiel speaks about the destruction and judgment, and then the hope of Ezekiel's temple. John writes about the destruction and final judgment, but the hope of the New Jerusalem. Yet, according to John, the people still failed to accept Jesus when he performed the miraculous acts before their eyes. Jesus, just as Ezekiel performed these sign acts before the public, before people, by God's instruction, but the hardened hearts, we saw in the video, the hardened hearts rejected God's warning. Jesus as Messiah, in the fourth Gospel of John, had used signs as evidence of who he was. Yet, like Ezekiel's hard-hearted audience, the hard-hearted people of Jesus ministered to, as depicted in the fourth Gospel, rejected his message. The important thing to remember when looking at John's signs is answering the question, why did he choose specific signs out of the numerous possible available to him? In John chapter 20, verses 30 through 31 as a reference, a comparative analysis of John's signs and in relation to Ezekiel's sign X will help answer this question. Why did God choose? We've been asking, why did God tell Ezekiel to do all these weird, bizarre things? And then, why did Jesus choose to perform these acts as miraculous signs? What was the message? So let us look at the summary of Jesus' signs that are presented in the book of John. Okay, first you can look at the list here. Turning water into wine. That was the first miracle in John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. Second, the cleansing of the temple. That was not really a miracle, but it was a sign act. People thought Jesus was crazy, and it was bizarre and strange, and they didn't know why Jesus was doing this, but cleansing of the temple. Third, the healing of the official's son, chapter 4, verses 46 through 54. Fourth, the healing of the man by the pool, the one who was not able to walk, right? And then, chapter 5, verses 1 through 9, the feeding of the 5,000, chapter 6, verses 1 through 15, the healing of the blind man, chapter 9, verses 1 through 7, and then the raising of Lazarus. And then after Jesus' resurrection, the miraculous catch of the fish. Now, let us think about the sign acts of Ezekiel. First, Ezekiel drawing Jerusalem on a brick and laying siege to the city. I don't need to explain further, right? We went over all these. Okay, chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. Ezekiel lying on his sides. Okay, one side and the other. Chapter 4, verses 4 through 6. Ezekiel eating rationed food that was cooked over dung. Right? Chapter 4, verses 9 through 17. Ezekiel cutting his hair with a sword. Chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. Ezekiel mimicking going into exile. Remember, he packs up and he's almost naked, right? Carrying the sack, and then God tells him to make a hole on the wall and crawl under rather than using the door, right? Okay. For sixth, Ezekiel not mourning over his wife's death. Seventh, the opening of Ezekiel's mouth. Remember, he was mute throughout this whole thing. And then eighth, the unifying of the two sticks. Chapter 37, verses 15 through 28. What is the significance? First, let us think about turning water into wine. We're not going to cover all 8 signs today, and we will probably run over to next week. But turning water into wine in Cana. The obvious rhetorical purpose of this first sign act and first miraculous sign that Jesus showed his disciples and us is that he is the glorious God who has returned. He has the power. He has the power to renew and change. Please do not think that these 8 signs of Jesus are paralleling one by one to the 8 sign acts of Ezekiel. They don't work like that. Okay? We're trying to get the message behind it. Okay? And so the message to Ezekiel was God's glory is in this temple. And it is only when the glory of God is in the midst of you that you have reason to live, that you are protected, that you will be okay, that you will be able to have joy and delight in your life. But remember, Ezekiel sees towards the beginning of his writing the glory of God leaving the temple, leaving Jerusalem. Jesus comes, and first thing he tells through the sign act, or through his prophecy, or his miraculous performance, is the glory of God is here now. And when I am here with you, your plain life, meaningless life, can be turned into joyful life and delightful life. There can be renewal. There can be that party that the host of the wedding feast, had lost hope. There was no way to get out of this trouble. Wine ran out. As though the joy of life or meaning of life had run out of our life. Although the party needs to still continue on, although I know my life needs to continue on, there's no reason, there's no motivation, there's no joy. Right? And Jesus turns that into even a joyful life, more joyful life. I pray that we may receive Jesus into our lives so that our second half of our life, meaning the life that begins from this point, will become more joyous, will become more meaningful. Right? The guests were saying, hey, how come the second wine, the later wine, tastes better, is better wine? Right? People expect for their life to become less better. People expect their life as we get older to become less exciting, less joyful. Right? Lack of energy, less health. But then, when Jesus comes in and intervenes, that life will become, wow, I thought as I get older, the second half of my life will be going towards death and will be less joyful. Amazing. It's becoming more exciting, more joyful, more meaningful, and healthier. Amen?
Amen.
That's the message Jesus is giving. And that's what Ezekiel and the people of God, people of Israel in Babylon were to receive as a message. Secondly, Jesus' second sign was the temple cleansing. Today's passage. Jesus goes to Jerusalem, visits the temple, and confronts those defiling the temple with their acts of commerce, and people who are basically there using the temple for their own purposes, for the wrong reasons. I pray that there will be no one here, no one in Zion Church that uses the temple of God or the church of God for the wrong reason. For my pride, for my success, or anything that has nothing to do with worshiping God only. Anything that has nothing to do with anything other than recognizing and coming to know God. The temple is supposed to serve the purpose of welcoming God and welcoming Jesus. And finally, the promised Messiah, for the first time, walked into that temple. What were the people supposed to do? What was the temple supposed to do? That is the day of celebration and worship and welcoming Jesus. Just like, remember David, when the Ark of the Covenant was coming in, he was dancing to a point where his clothes fell off, and he didn't even know. Right? He was so excited. That is how the people were supposed to react to the coming in of Jesus to the temple. However, nobody recognized. Everybody was busy doing their own thing that they always do at church or at the temple. Right? And that was the wrong thing. So Jesus confronts them, just like through Ezekiel, God is telling the Israelites, you use the temple for wrong reason. Remember the image that we saw? You came into the temple, but in actuality, you were worshiping the idols. In actuality, you were bowing down to the wrong things. Putting up God as a facade, but deep inside, you yourselves became idols. So that's why God is saying, because of that, the temple will be destroyed. Jesus says, because of that, destroy the temple. In the end, Jesus' body was destroyed. That is love. That is love. Rather than destroying his people, he says, I am the temple. And that's why I need to be destroyed in order for it to be rebuilt. When Jesus said, destroy the temple, what was he speaking about? Do you think he was speaking about the physical temple only when rebuilding it, it's only his body? No. He knows. When he says, destroy the temple, he knows it's going to be his body. Ezekiel also, God called Ezekiel and said, Son of Man. God's voice called on Ezekiel and saying, Son of Man. Who called himself Son of Man? Jesus called himself Son of Man throughout the book of Luke. And God told Ezekiel to lay on his side. How many days?
20 years.
Lay on his other side. How many days? Okay. Do you want to go through all those lessons once again? Okay, say no. Yeah, I'll give you a hint. Altogether, it's 430, right? So, and somebody said 390. So do the subtraction. How many years? 500 days, 40 days, and 390 days. Now, on which side? 40 days on which side? Left side or right side? And then 390 days on? You go and check the book of Ezekiel. Okay? But what was the meaning of that? Ezekiel's body became the temple. Basically, the people of God. On the side, meaning it fell over. Destruction. Okay? For, 40 and then 390. Right? So, same thing as Jesus. Ezekiel was foreshadowing the body, that one man's body representing the whole nation and collapsing, falling down on behalf of them. Scholars have noted that Jesus' reference to the destruction of the temple of his body has prophetic overtones of impending disaster of actual city and temple. Later, in 70 AD, the actual temple and Jerusalem were destroyed. But the difference was, Ezekiel could not take away the sins of the Israelites. He was only foreshadowing, prophetically doing it. But Jesus, by doing so, took away the sins of all who believes in him. Now, that's why the result is different. But let us go to the next sign of Jesus. Third, the healing and feeding signs. Signs 3 through 6, the third sign, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. These 4 signs, and you have the list there. The healing of the official's son, healing of the man by the pool, healing of the 5,000, feeding of the 5,000, healing of the blind man. All have a similar theme of providing either healing or food for the individuals. Jesus' work and sign in these specific areas were meant to show that God, He is God, the Messiah, who can provide for His people. The hint is I can provide you with this. So if you want to live, what do you need to do? Come to me. That's what Jesus is saying. And then he even gives life. He says, he's basically saying, if you want life, come to me. There will be destruction, but you come to me, and there will be life. Simple message, very simple message throughout the Bible. Right? See, the prophets are basically saying, stop disobeying God, stop worshiping idols, then God will bless you. Continue doing those things, you will be destroyed. Is that very hard? Is that a difficult message to understand? It's the same message back in Egypt, back there. You know, the covenant of the torch. Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 through 16. The 4 messages in the covenant of the torch. Does anybody remember? First message. Something about 400 years, right? Your descendants will be oppressed 400 years. Second message. I think it's the young children who are more excited about remembering these things. Adults. Second message, come on. God will punish that nation and they will return with many possessions. Right? Third message, Abraham, you will die at a good old age. Fourth message, they will return in the 4th generation. Okay? You know why this covenant is very, very important? Senior pastor has always said this is the most important. It is like the basic. Because this is not only a prophecy about the exodus, slavery in Egypt, Exodus, and come back to Canaan. These 4 things contain the entire Bible. Where are you out of the 4? Are you still oppressed? Because of our sins, we will be oppressed in Egypt. Right? But God will have mercy and free us from there, from the bondage of the world. That is the first coming, Jesus Christ. And you will come out with many possessions, meaning great grace and blessings. But you will walk throughout the wilderness. Abraham will be gone. But the descendants will walk through the wilderness. And in the 4th generation, who's the 4th generation? Jesus Christ, but then Joseph, right? Joseph, who represents Jesus Christ. But Joseph died. What do you mean, come back in 4th generation? Right? And then coming back to Canaan, where is Canaan for us? Canaan, in the Old Testament, especially during the patriarchal times, the theme was go back to Canaan. Jacob fled away, but then he needs to come back to the Father's house. Coming back to the Father's house is the theme. So God is calling them. And where's the Father's house that we need to return to? It's called the kingdom of heaven. Canaan, entering into Canaan is us going into the kingdom of heaven. That means come out of Babylon, come out of Egypt, and come into the land of Canaan. But in the process, we're in the wilderness. We're still in the wilderness, right? But which campsite are you at? The 3rd one or the 30th one? First one or the 41st one? Right? And so, throughout even the wilderness journey, God is telling the Israelites, I am the giver of the food. I am the Savior from your enemies in this wilderness. And the main message through Moses was, you abide by my commandments, you will be blessed. you disobey my commandments, you'll be cursed. Simple message. Even today, it's a very simple message, but we put a lot of conditions to it, a lot of arguments to it, we make it complicated. And we put our situations and circumstances to it, but God, in my culture, but God, the way I grew up, but God, my parents, but God, my financial abilities or situation, but God, and in the end, we're giving excuses why we have to disobey you, God. Jesus' provision of food and wine, healing, is a reversal of the curses once placed upon Israel. Jesus is promising us the same thing. We may be living through these difficulties and hardships that seem like it's a result of curse or punishment. But same message the Bible is telling us, Jesus is telling us, you come to me, I give you food, I give you healing. I pray that we, even today, this might sound very simple and very old, but I pray that you will come to Jesus and find healing. Most of us, I say us because we are all human beings. We human beings have hurts in our hearts. We have pain in our lives. And I pray that we will be able to find Jesus and receive healing. On the other side, Ezekiel, God says, cook food with fire that was made by dung, poop. It's two contrasting acts telling the Israelites, basically, you will eat out of bitterness. You will not have enough good food. See, but Jesus comes and gives an answer to that. But you come to me, I'll give you food. Ezekiel, his entire body and life was sickening or ill. But Jesus comes and says, I give you healing. Lastly, let us think about raising of Lazarus. John chapter 11, this is one of probably Jesus' last sign of public ministry prior to the before his crucifixion that Apostle John is presenting to us. Ezekiel's one of last sign acts was the death of his wife. Here, Lazarus dies, Ezekiel's wife dies. In each case, the sign directly is connected to death of someone that the main character really cares for. It says, Lazarus was Jesus' beloved, special one. Ezekiel's wife, obviously, was his beloved wife. John records that Jesus agapaoed Lazarus. He loved Lazarus. God tells Ezekiel that he will take away the desire of your eyes. Desire of your eyes. That's referring to his wife. That's in Ezekiel 24, verse 16. Another thing is, also similar to both accounts, is the fact that the impending death of the person in question is known by the main character before it happens. God told Ezekiel, your wife is going to die in a few days. When Lazarus was sick to death, Jesus received a message. Lazarus is sick to the point of death. Jesus knew, Ezekiel knew that death was going to happen. In each case, these deaths the death serves as a sign for something greater. The death of Ezekiel's wife served as a precursor to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. The death of Lazarus served as a sign and symbol of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the true temple. However, the difference is Ezekiel's wife did not come back to life. But Lazarus, the one that Jesus loved, came back to life. That little contrast shows us that Ezekiel is throwing up the ball. Jesus is catching the ball here. Ezekiel presents the problem here in the book of Ezekiel, and Jesus gives a solution here. So why these acts? Think of this as our life, these 8 signs. God comes to us, tells us, here is the glory of God, the presence of God that will renew your life, that will give joy to your life. However, because of our disobedience, disbelief, all these things are happening. There is lame, there is sick, they're hungry. But Jesus continues to say, bring me into your life. Come to me, I will give you life. And then eventually, just as God warned that destruction takes place, death comes. But even death, when Jesus is there, can be reversed. Let us believe. This is a very simple story and a simple message, something that you and I have heard millions of times, or hundreds of times. But let us think about it one more time. Jesus says it's very simple. Bring me, invite me. Jesus says, invite him into your life. These things will change. Can we stop giving different situations and conditions and different case studies, but simply just say, believe it, and say amen. Jesus comes into my life will be renewed. Amen. And so let us pray from today that our life, your life will be renewed, that our children's life will be powerful with the protection of God, so that these destructions and hardships, hunger, sickness will not come into their life. Amen? Let us pray.